Yeah. All right. Let's do that then. So for those of you who don't know me, because a few of you we've met before, so you know me a little bit. Um, my name my name is Ed. I'm from the Netherlands. I have a background in business administration. I did a professional doctorate. I have a background in the logistics industry, and in 2004 I started working for myself. And part of what I do is teaching. So I'm teaching about 60-70% of my time, and business gaming is a large part of what I do in my training, also in consultancy or company trainings, and in schools. Just as a frame of reference. I am teaching mainly in business schools, which means that I deal a lot with MBAs, executive MBAs, some specialized master programs, but all of the students that I see normally have a little bit of working experience. Some are full-time programs, some are part-time programs, but I deal a little bit less with undergrad, with universities and universities of applied sciences. So just for you to position a little bit what my background in terms of the teaching is. I've been using business games since 2008 or something, I think. The ones of InChange came in at 2010, I think, with the Fresh Connection, which I'm still using quite a lot. I'm using Blue Connection also in my trainings. I've written a number of books. Two of those actually have a link to the simulation games. I may talk about that a little bit later. I have a YouTube channel. I'm not a YouTuber, but I have a YouTube channel and on which I publish videos with some sort of conceptual content. I mean, I started doing that, of course, during Corona, when I needed to save some time for the online sessions in order to facilitate the group work, which, of course, online is a bit slower than in the classroom. So I needed to push some other content out of the class sessions, and I made some videos in order to support that. So they're basically things that I would normally talk about in the classroom, but then I put those into videos, which are on my YouTube channel. So, the topic of the session, how to create a rich and engaging experience, and it's really about the integrated learning approach, as we've come to talk about this. It's sort of the way I approach my course design. I did that already quite in an intuitive way, in this way, before I actually sort of tried to put on paper what this was really about. And maybe as a context, I should start there, which is basically the integrated learning approach. Obviously starts with, for whom is this, right? Who's the audience? And I always like to say to my students, and I explicitly tell them that this is the case, it's not about me teaching, it's about them learning, right? And that's the difference. And I think I need to tell them, because there's still quite a lot of students I find who are expecting a teacher to lecture, right? So I need to explain to them that the amount of things that they learn is not really measured by the amount of time that I talk. And since I don't do that a lot, because I do a lot of group work where they can apply stuff, I need to be able to explain that to them so that they know what they are up to, right? Because otherwise they will tell me afterwards, well, you didn't explain much, or you didn't talk about theory, or there was no traditional classical lecturing here, which I do a little bit, but not too much, right? And definitely not the whole period of time. So first of all, this is about the learners, right? And then I've formulated a number of sort of generic goals, which I pretty much apply to all of the courses that I do, whether they are about operations and supply chain, whether they're about the circular economy, whether they're about entrepreneurship and business modeling, whether they're about project management, and all the other courses that I typically deliver. I start with the same generic goals, by the way, and I want all those to be present somehow or another in the courses that I do. And I want to give a few examples. First of all, meaningful and relevant. I need to make sure that students understand that what they're about to learn is relevant to them. And that's also creating engagement, of course, because if they know from the very beginning, oh, this is going to be relevant to me, I better pay attention. And that is, of course, helpful. So the first thing I do at the beginning of the program, and I always put a little bit of effort in there, finding out, particularly if I work with a new school that I haven't worked with before, that I link to other programs there are other courses in the program that the students are doing. So what are the links between the course we are about to begin and the other courses that you have? Yeah, so that directly creates context, which I find important, right? That they can see, oh, hey, this is actually not an isolated course. No, it links to a lot of other things. And I will normally throughout the course come back to those points. And you remember I said that there's a link to finance? Well, here you have it, right? So that they really connect those dots also. Now, the other part of being relevant is that I normally link the session throughout, or the course throughout, to things I see in the newspaper, I read on websites, I see on YouTube, or whatever the channel can be. So I continuously try to update the materials so that it reflects stuff that I think or hope the students will also have seen in some way or another. Yeah, and I connect that to the topic of the course. Yeah, and that makes it relevant. Yeah, because it's easier to explain that something which is on the news continuously is relevant to you than something where there's nowhere ever a link. It's just the only link is to an academic book, right? Which I definitely don't want to do. So that's the second part. Then about the complexity, the knowledge and the skills, and the mix of individual and team activities. I want those in there, right? I can explain to students that something is complex, but they will only really understand if they feel the complexity themselves, right? And this is really, for me, about experiential learning, right? And this is also where the games come in, for example, but experiential learning can also be about the case method, for example. No? You put yourself into the shoes of the managing director of this company and the problem that they had at the time. What will you do, right? And what's your analysis? So it's about experiential learning. Put the students in the driving seat, yeah, because then they have no way to escape from the complexities. And that's my point in the end. No, how do you deal with those complexities? What are the skills you develop in order to deal with those? And that's something that I explicitly look for in my courses. So Boya 2007, I don't know what your real name is because I can't see it. If you feel that you need to drop out because it's too repetitive, then that's okay. Or I skip quickly to a part which is maybe then also to the interest of the others, right? So please let me know whichever you prefer. And then, of course, the methodology. So how to motivate students? Well, motivation comes intrinsically from the content. And if I am able to make the content relevant to them, then obviously that should hopefully provide some sort of intrinsic motivation. And the other is the methodology. I mean, you can do cases in quite an entertaining way. I mean, not entertaining in sort of being the clown, but entertaining in dynamic, interactive, fun to do, and actually you learn also something from what your colleagues are saying in the classroom, right? A methodology in this case also could mean, for example, sorry, I need to go on the others. Could be the game in this case. No, if we talk about circular economy, the blue connection. And there, the methodology, of course, helps in terms of it's complex. The game is complex. So when I say, be careful, guys, this is complex stuff, in the game, they will feel that this is indeed really the case. And at the same time, there is this competition element in the game. So gamification, it works because in the end, they all want to win, right? And that keeps them engaged. Even though I never would use the results of the game in the grading of a course. And I know that there's other people who do it differently, but I never do that. I have never done that, probably never will. But still, the competitive element works, yeah, because at the end, they want to beat their classmates and basically tell them the rest of the year that they beat them, right? And that's giving a motivation to try and really do their best, right? In terms of the course design, maybe I want to highlight very quickly one thing. There's an overarching storyline. Okay, and this is also from to your question about how I go about the blue connection, particularly. All my courses, all the courses I do have an overarching storyline. And for example, if I do a course about operations and supply chain management, basic course about operations supply chain management, I would never call that course the course of operations management and supply chain management. I would speak about the story of what and how, and the story of simple but not easy. And that's the storyline. And that comes back all the time. And I refer to that and I give examples and they feel it, you know. So that story starts living. It's a framing in the end, no? And in the case of the Blue Connection, my framing in that case is the story of narrative and numbers, right? And the reason for that is fairly straightforward. It's also captured, by the way, in the book that goes with the Blue Connection, in a sense, or that we wrote about it together with Rosanna Hense, the story of narrative and numbers. And the story of narrative and numbers actually comes from an article by Joan Magretta in Harvard Business Review in 2002 already, which has nothing to do with the circular economy, of course, but it's an article about the purpose of business models, why business models matter. That's the title of the article. And of course, she makes an argument in the article about why business models are still important. That this is the post-internet bubble dip, so to speak. No, so everybody was completely fed up with all kinds of hypes about new internet-driven business models at the time, right after 2000, of course. And her article basically was about, no, hold on, guys. Just because the internet bubble burst doesn't mean that business models are useless. No, there's a point to them. And that's why the title, Why Business Models Matter. And basically, she speaks about narrative and numbers. Any business model, in order to succeed, needs to pass two tests. The narrative test, the story should make sense, and the numbers test, the P&L should work, right? And the reason I chose this as a framing for the Blue Connection, the game about the circular economy, is because when I read about the circular economy and when I talk to people about the circular economy, I hear a lot of narrative, and I hear very, very little about practical solutions that actually work in the sense that, as a company, for example, make money, right? Or at least not make a loss, which in many cases is already quite something. And it's quite striking, and I'm more and more convinced that this was actually the right framing that we chose for the book at the time. And what I've done in courses since then, already before then, but also since then particularly, the more I play this game or use this game in courses about circular economy, the more convinced I am that this story is necessary. There's a lot of students who are getting even towards the end of their courses or programs, in which they've had a number of sustainability classes and all that. And they tell me after the course, wow, this narrative and numbers thing was really an eye-opener for me. And I actually find that quite shocking, right? In the sense that students are apparently able to finish their MBA program, and in some cases a 2-year MBA program full-time, in which they've heard a lot about sustainability and nobody actually talked to them about, well, you know, guys, this is also a business that needs to finance itself somehow or another. Yeah, you can become very circular and go very bankrupt in the process. I mean, it's not that because you decide to become circular that you automatically become profitable. No, actually, it's quite the opposite. There's plenty of examples that show that that's not the case, right? And that's the important framing. So I really insist in that. And the game is absolutely wonderful to support that, because in the game you run this company that wants to become profitable, and then you find out that, geez, this is actually quite complicated. In order to become profitable while being circular, it's really about balancing a lot of things properly, and that is really a powerful feature, right? So overarching storyline, which is really important in that. Let me skip a few things and talk a little bit about the course design then. I mean, once again, in order to make a course dynamic, really to make a course engaging, it's about a mix of things. No, the overarching storyline that glues everything together, in this case the story of narrative and numbers, but also then a mix of activities, individual, group, related to the game, not related to the game, supporting to the game, the gameplay itself, something about outside stuff, you know, a mix of things, a mix of dynamics, so to speak, because that keeps the course alive in a way, you know, and that's what I want to play with, diversity in things, you know. They work together in their stable teams. I shake the teams up and I let them work in another team, for example, on a similar exam, and I will give you an example of that in a moment. So what does that look like? Typically, I ask them to do some things before the course starts. For example, some of those videos that I referred to, and then we have the course itself. Now, what you see here, everything which is written in dark blue, that could be, let's say, lecturing. Okay, I explain some things. Everything which is in light blue are group activities. Some with the stable teams that they play in, some with let's sort of random teams, right? It's a mix. I want to shake it up a little bit. Then everything in this brownish color would be stuff related to the game, yeah, which is sort of woven into the course in different moments. You see that after every round of gameplay, there is a link to theory. So I really want to establish a link between the gameplay and the theory. Actually, that's where I really connect the dots. The gameplay allows me to do that, but I need the gameplay to do that. But it's really about what I do afterwards, because that's where I connect the dots between theory and application, right? And normally those debriefs, when I link to the theory, are followed by a little group exercise in which I ask them to actually apply what I just spoke about from the perspective of the game. So it's in a way preparing them for the next round of gameplay. Now, some of you may be familiar with the fresh connection, but maybe not yet with the blue connection. If that's the case, for those of you that already know the blue connection, you may already know what I'm about to tell, but those of you who are not familiar with the blue connection, my approach to teaching with the fresh connection is totally different from what I do with the blue connection, but really different, radically different. And there's a few reasons for that. First of all, the blue connection is a much more strategic game, whereas in the fresh connection, you optimize round after round within a given business model. So you can basically start simple and make it more complex along the way, and that works perfectly fine. In the blue connection, it is actually about changing the entire business model. The decisions you make are much more strategic. They are about the business model, which basically means that in order for you as a team to decide on what your strategy, your business model is going to be, you first need to get to know the options. And that's where the second dimension comes in. In my experience so far, and maybe 10 years from now, that will be totally different. But for now, my conclusion is that most people, students, but also people in companies, don't really have a frame of reference when it comes to circular strategies. Okay, but if that's the case, I can't leave them on their own to figure out and just decide on a proper strategy. I need to make sure that they understand the different options, which is what I do. So round one of the gameplay in the blue connection, I focus on one of those strategies. Round two, I focus on another one. And round three, I focus on another one. It's okay, now you know everything. Now we can start playing the competition. Yeah, which is really a different approach from what I do with the fresh connection. And that's what I learned over time. I didn't do that in the beginning in this way, but it really works, I think, much better now than what I did in the beginning. Then I have the whole course, of course, and then you see, by the way, on day 3 in light blue, best practices per role. So that's one of those things where I sort of shake up a little bit. They've been working in their stable teams in a number of exercises when they play the game, for example. And in this best practices per role, I basically group them together. Okay, all the salespeople together from the game, all the purchasing people together, and so forth. And then I give them a number of things to discuss. So I break the routine a little bit. Yeah, which is always refreshing. And in fact, they do get a lot of insights there, which is quite great, actually. And I get a lot of positive feedbacks about those exercises. It's really simple, but they actually appreciate the fact that they can share the complexities that they find in their own role in the game, that they can share that with other people who play the same role. right? And some that will learn from each other, right? Oh, I solved it this way. Oh, yeah, but in my case, I tried to do this, but my colleague then in the team said this. Oh, yeah, in my case as well, but I did this, right? So they have this interesting conversation about that, which is really, I think, very positive, and it sort of refreshes a little bit because they're, for a moment at least, away from their gameplay team, so to speak. Yeah, and then normally at the end of the course, of course, there is some assignments, and I typically would do a reflection paper to close the learning cycle of the game. So I would ask them to write their reflections on the basis of a few specific questions I asked them. And then normally I ask them to write a company paper. And in the case of MBAs and executive MBAs, that's typically about their own company. So that they can not only do something for the school because I need a grade, but also actually do something useful for their own company where they work. So that's what I would always try to look for. Good. So very quickly, basically, this is what this integrated learning approach is about. I'm writing a document currently. It's a bit of a living document still, which will probably sooner or later will be published on the website of InChange, on the education platform, the game platform, so to speak, where teachers have access to that. In addition to this, there is the book that I already mentioned before, which is sort of capturing the integrated learning approach on paper, right? So what you find in the book is the basis for applying the whole integrated approach on paper. And what you can find on the website of InChange is a white paper on the integrated learning approach, as well as, I see that this is the wrong picture, by the way. It's the integrated learning approach applied to mastering the supply chain. There is another webinar about mastering the circular economy, also on the website of InChange, right? So summing up, and I hope that, David, that this is more or less the 50-50 you indicated. So for me, the rich and engaging experience really is about blending things, right? Keep it alive and dynamic. So a blend of relevant topics where you highlight to the students why the topic is actually relevant to them, why they should pay attention. A blend of perspectives, so linking to the other areas of the company, for example, or linking to what the outside world may think of that from a company point of view, these kind of things, and a blend of methodologies, a case method, little exercises, gameplay, different things around the presentations here or there, so that they keep, that the pace of the activities is diverse. From some things where they really dive into the details, for example, a round of gameplay, have to analyze a lot of things, and other activities which are more interactive, more discussion or presenting or discussing or these kinds of things. Yeah, so that's pretty much what I had prepared, but then in a high-speed version. Yeah, I would maybe turn to the audience in this case. So David, Fran, and the others who were here. If there's any particular questions that you may have that I could try and answer. I'm happy to hear that, Fran, what you're saying. As you go along, please feel free to reach out in case you have more questions about that. By the time you get to your own first session with TBC, for example, you're about to prepare your own course for that. I would be more than happy to continue the conversation then and make that specific for well, the potential course you would have in front of you. Any of the others? Any questions there? I don't think so. I can maybe shed a light. No, if there's no further questions, then sorry, David, you're saying. With the blue connection, I find that groups stumble because they forget step details. True. I mean, one of the things that I've done, and I don't remember, David, if I shared that with you when we spoke last time, but one of the things that I've done is I've created an Excel file, a template in a way, which is in a way a summary of the income statement, the financial statement in the Blue Connection. And the only lines which I've put in that template is basically the lines from the income statement which have a direct relationship to circularity in one way or another. And then I've added a section there in which they indicate the circular strategy and the revenue models, right? And I asked them round after round, before we go to the next round, to fill that out. And that's a manual action. There's nothing wrong with that. They have to look in the statement, copy it into the Excel file, basically, but then analyze it. And of course, I help them with what they should be looking for. No, and the thing is, since it's a reduction of this long income statement, it's only a few lines, of course, or much less. It's much more transparent how things connect to each other, right? So, for example, I'm doing the refurbishment strategy. Okay, great. So in the revenue part, I have this extra line of second-hand market sales. Great, and that contains a number, let's say 10 million, whatever. And then slightly below, there is actually the costs for buying back the bikes, from the market. And let's say that says 8 million. Okay, and then it says cost for refurbishing, and then it says 3 million. And then you can already see, okay, but it's 10 million in revenue and it's 11 already spent. That's not a good business case. And it becomes very transparent then, right? And that has proven to be a very powerful exercise, actually. I have to admit, I didn't design it actually as an exercise for class. This is sort of the serendipity in a way, I created it when a team at the end of a game asked me, can you give us feedback? Because we have the feeling that we haven't captured some things, right? And this was a class where I had, I think, 9 teams. 8 did pretty well, and they were the one team that never got it straightened out. So they always suffered. But they didn't ask me really to give them feedback. And there was a very sort of an executive MBA group. And my rule with executive MBA groups is if you don't ask me questions, you don't get answers, right? You have to go out and ask me. They never asked me questions, so I never helped them, basically. And then afterwards they say, yeah, we know, we never ask you any questions, but yeah, we still have this feeling that that we've missed some points. And then I created this Excel file for them, and I said, it's actually quite interesting. Let me now make it empty again, and now use it as a template, and that works really well, I have to say. Still, because they get, because of this Excel file, they get more eye for the details. It still doesn't tell them what to do, but at least it helps them analyze what they did, right? Which is already a good step towards understanding. Right, it's a complex game. It's a complex game, but yeah, I mean, I do the value chain mapping at the beginning, always, the one that is also mentioned in the book, which is basically make a flow chart and populate it with data from the system, from the linear starting point, and then I ask them to do that in 3 different dimensions. Okay, put the numbers of each of the flows in money, in units, and in kilograms. And I said, it doesn't make sense to you now, but believe me, it will. Because the units are going to be the biggest input later on in the game when you start evaluating workload in maintenance, workload in refurbishment. That's all based on numbers of bikes, for example, right? So that's why the units. The second thing is, the kilograms, well, according to the formulas for circularity, and in the game, the clients pay a premium for circularity, the bank gives you a discount for circularity. So you're interested in pushing the circularity percentage to some extent. And what you have to know then is that the circularity percentage, the calculation, is based on kilograms, meaning I need to know where the heavy stuff is, right? Because that pushes the circularity up. That's the heavy stuff, right? And the other thing is, everything is a little business case, no? So if I want to do remanufacturing, at the component level, that is, right? So I'm doing remanufacturing. Okay, so I spend money on getting the bikes back. I spend money on disassembling the bike. I spend money on remanufacturing the component. So I have a number of costs. And the benefit of that is that I feed those components back into my production of new bikes, through which I save money from purchasing from my outside suppliers. So the cost of that should be offset by the saving I have at my suppliers. So that's why I need to know the flows in money, because the business case is more likely to work with the expensive stuff, right? So I need the units for the workload, I need the kilograms for the circularity, the heavy things, and I need the money for the business cases, because I want to start with the expensive stuff. Yeah, and that leads them to the point, if you do that mapping properly, and it's a message I insist on continuously, you want to first start with the heavy expensive stuff, because it's more favorable. The light and cheap stuff, forget it, it will never work. There's no point. The headaches, of course, are the ones in the middle. No, light but expensive, because light will not contribute a lot to the circularity percentage, but if it's expensive, the business case for recycling or remanufacturing may actually work, right? So, and that's how you go about them. So the more you feed those concepts back, and the more understanding hopefully they will get. And that's really what those debriefs are about for me, right? That's where I get the time to explain those concepts. So I don't normally go into much detail in the results of the teams during the debrief. No? For example, okay, let's look at a team and go through and see what happens and all that. I rather prefer to give them the instruments with which they can do that analysis themselves. And of course, I will be there in case of questions, right? So I don't disappear, but I would rather put them in the driving seat also for that, no? Rather than sort of spelling it out for them. Because then they're listening and they say yes, 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 without maybe having really understood. So I'd rather do that. No, so give it back as a teamwork. It's okay. Now go and work on that. Help me here if you have questions. No problem, right? So I was a long answer, I think, but I hope it was useful to you, David.
Thank you, Ed.
Any other questions, maybe from anyone here? No, if not, then yeah, I would like to thank you for your attention. I mean, for some of you, it's also quite late, I imagine. I don't know how many sessions you already did in the conference, but you might be a bit tired then. There's a few more sessions this evening, I think. So yeah, feel invited to also join those. Maybe Mariana, you can speak a little bit about that. At least in any case, thanks for joining. And if you have questions later on, feel free to reach out. Probably the easiest is through the organization directly, and they will know how to find me. So thanks again, and have a good evening or a good day, depending on the time zone where you are.